Thank you, Senator Hirono, for those kind words. We have a fabulous group of panelists for you now. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Satsuki Ina, and many of you know her. Dr. Ina was born in California's Tule Lake Segregation Center, a maximum security concentration camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. She is Professor Emeritus in the School of Education at California State University, Sacramento. She's been researching the long-term impact of incarceration trauma and its impact through the generations. She is also an activist, writer, and award-winning documentary maker. She is also a practicing psychotherapist in the Bay Area, specializing in helping communities confronted with trauma related to clergy abuse, acculturation, racism, and captivity. Dr. Ina, so wonderful to have you with us. Please introduce your panelists.
And particularly to make sure that we get out the vote. So thank you, Senator, for taking the time to be with us today. And speaking of women on fire, this morning's panel is about solidarity in the face of injustice. And I have the honor of being with 6 amazing women who have been during their lifetime on the front lines, doing the work, confronting the challenges, and most importantly, here today to inspire each of us to do our part. I've asked each of the 6 panelists to address a few of these questions. The first one, what do you see the most pressing issue for your community at this moment of national reckoning? The second question, how are the fates of all of our communities interconnected? And the third question, because we have thousands of Japanese Americans, people of all colors here today listening to your words, we'd like to know, how can we as allies best support your community at this time? So thank you for being here. And we're going to begin with Silky Shah, who's here from Bellingham, Washington. She's the Executive Director of Detention Watch Network, a national coalition building power to abolish immigrant detention in the US. She has worked as an organizer on issues related to immigration, detention, mass incarceration, and racial and migrant justice for over 15 years. Thank you, Silky.
Thank you so much. It's really, really wonderful to be here. I feel incredibly honored to be a part of this space and to be working in solidarity with Tsuru for Solidarity. Right now, I think, especially as an Asian American, South Asian American who growing up really, when I was starting to learn about social justice issues, the internment of Japanese Americans, was such a big part of that sort of learning and history and understanding. And also learning about the activism within the community. I'm wearing my Asians for Black Lives sweater, which has Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X on it. Also learning about Grace Lee Boggs. So just really, there's like a lot of history of Asian American resistance that was such a big part of us thinking about both like what we do for the Asian American community, but also what we do to make it so that all people in the US are thriving, so that Black people in the US are thriving. And that's such an important conversation for this moment. So Detention Watch Network is a national network, again, trying to abolish immigration detention through organizing, advocacy, communications, and detention itself. It's so important when we think about detention. to really understand the role of US incarceration, which disproportionately targets Black and brown people, and specifically Black people, as we think about, the history of it, especially since in the last 40 years. And, understanding detention, you have to look at the rise of incarceration. They're happening sort of in tandem. And it's really a part of the rise of incarceration in the US. And the US, for folks who don't know, incarcerates over 2 million people in prisons and jails in this country, which is more than any other country in the world. We have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. So as we all know, detention itself is prison, detention is incarceration, internment is incarceration. And I think when we think about that question of our relationship here between these fights, what we have to understand is that all these systems are intertwined. Detention doesn't happen without the criminal legal system in the US. ICE and CBP don't happen without the existence of police and the military. All of those things are intertwined. And as we fight for the release of people from detention, the release of people from incarceration, and also preventing further deportation and providing refuge for people who are coming to this country, we have to think about how all of these systems were created based on racism, and specifically anti-Black racism. And think about what that means for us to build systems where Black people are thriving, because if we do that, then all people will be thriving. So, as we think about what we do right now, I wanted to name a few things for this community as we move forward, as we, fight injustice together. And first and foremost, I think this is a time to think about what we are doing as a community to work alongside, to lift up Black-led organizations, Black communities, and how we are building those relationships. So I encourage folks to think about that in their community. What does that look like? What does that intentional work to build those relationships mean? And I think for us at the national level, also doing some of that to think about how we can support you in that work. Also, so much of our work in the detention context, you have over 200 facilities across the country used for immigration detention, including obviously detention centers run by ICE, also detention centers run by private prison corporations, and also lots and lots of county jails, the majority of which are county jails and state prisons that are also incarcerating people due to the criminal legal system. So I think a lot of times we talk about ending ICE contracts, ending the use of ICE detention, but we have to think about what these sites of detention are broadly, and targeting all people in the US to punish and to really, push that sort of framing of racism within what's happening in this country. And so I think I would encourage folks who are, because there are over 200 facilities, that means where you are, there are detention centers that exist that are probably not that far away, and you can join those campaigns and efforts to either shut down a facility, or sometimes they're trying to build new facilities. And I know this group is focused a lot on family detention. And I think those facilities and what we're seeing there and the sort of potential for that growth is also really important to call attention to, and understanding that around there, like in Texas in particular, you have so much incarceration and so much detention, and those fights need to happen alongside each other as well. Lastly, I want to talk about just quickly this week, very quickly, I'll just say, the call for defund police is really a key piece that we need to be calling for. And I think we've had a campaign called Defund Hate that's calling for defunding ICE and CBP. And ICE and CBP are the largest police forces in this country, and there's an inherent connection there. So I think as you're thinking about defunding police at the local level, also thinking about pushing your members of Congress to defund ICE and CBP. They're the people who have power to really reduce the numbers of people who are targeted and reduce the amount of money. That's where the power is to really prevent this. And so it's going to take a lot. We're in this for the long haul. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you and be fighting alongside all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Silky. Defund hate. It's a global specific term that we're all working for. And thanks for the specific information and guidelines for what people can do to be helpful. Our next speaker is Sheri Dickerson. Sheri Dickerson. Sheri is here from Oklahoma City. She's an activist, an organizer, a clergy member, a truth teller, profoundly committed to freeing humanity from oppression and elevating society to its most optimum level. Sheri has spent 25 years on the front lines of the battle for intersectional people's rights, uniting marginalized communities across the spectrum to struggle and thrive together in one of the most challenging regions of the country. She's founder and executive director of Black Lives Matter Oklahoma. She's founding member of the Women's March in Oklahoma. She's a member of the board, past member of the board of the Oklahoma City Martin Luther King Coalition, Pride, the Diversity Center of Oklahoma, and the National Association of Black Social Workers. Thank you, Sheri, for being here.
Again, wow, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. To be amongst each of these powerhouses of social justice and racial equity work, I'm very humbled. Some of the things that you spoke about that I've had the privilege and the honor to work within my communities is I still sit in awe. But at this moment, in this time, looking at what is currently happening, there is an uprising. And it is certainly timely, and it was way past time for the voices to rise up and say that Black Lives Matter. One of the questions that we talk about is what is important about, or how do we integrate and do intersectional work with communities of color? One of my favorite sayings, and I use this as my own personal life mantra, is a statement that was credited to a woman of color, Lilith Watson. But she says that she actually derived it from the late, great leader of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you understand that your liberation is bound in mine, then let us work together. And so surely all of the communities of color, Black persons, brown persons, those who are our Native and Indigenous sisters and brothers, those within the LGBTQIA communities, all of these, those who are part of the interfaith communities from each spectrum that understand the travail of discrimination and oppression, we have to rise up against and to dismantle the systems of white supremacy. We have to stand up to dismantle the systems of oppression, of racism. And we have to make sure that our white allies decide that they want to, we need some accomplices in this work. That means that they are in the trenches with us, but they also understand that the impacted communities should be the leaders in giving voice and also giving instruction of what is needed in this time of the movement. So intersectional as well as intergenerational relationships must continue to be established. I am very privileged, and I understand my privilege of having been under the tutelage of those like Benjamin Hooks, those like Maya Angelou, those like my godmother and aunt, Clara Looper, who actually was the leader who held the first sit-in the country. that happened here in Oklahoma City. And so there is a long history of legacy and change agents that come from this culture rich and history rich area in Oklahoma. Many of you all are familiar with the atrocity that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is about a 92-mile stretch between Oklahoma City, where I am, and my brothers and sisters in Tulsa. But we know what happened in the Greenwood community and the destruction of Black Wall Street, an entire community of thriving Black people. And so, right now, what is most important is to continue to sustain the movements, continue to pour into your activists. Um, and I, as a Black, queer, non-gender conforming person, so my pronouns are she, her, they, them, I assure you and encourage you to make sure that you are trusting Black women. We have been the sustainers and founders of almost all of the movements. And so, working within alliance with those, I've also had the privilege of working with the amazing leaders and the communities within Tsuru for Solidarity. They stood with us here when we did an action in Lawton, Oklahoma. You've stood with us nationally in situations that have continued to, so sorry, you have stood with us in situations about racial inequities and helped us call for equity, understanding that we deserve more. So we're asking that you push for reparations for Black persons. And we also stand with our Native and Indigenous communities. Oklahoma means land of the red man. And so we acknowledge that we exist on stolen land. And so we also are in solidarity with our Indigenous communities in saying, give the land back and restore balance and fairness to this country. Lastly, understand that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so, as many of us have given energy and our lives to this work, we understand that we have quite a ways to go. Hopefully, the atrocities that we've seen, like that of which happened to Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, and I have to mention that Oklahoma, we have been number one or number two in officer involved fatalities or injuries for far too long. We're number one in incarceration of Black women and Black people and people of color. And we're number one in the most private prisons. And we have some of the most atrocious detention centers. And we do have ICE agents that are in those. We are asking that you stand with Oklahoma, that you stand with Black Lives Matter, which right now is the organization that is doing a lot of the work that was just spoke about as far as defunding the police, demanding justice for those that have been affected and the lives that were lost within interaction with law enforcement, which were killed by the systems of white supremacy. And we're asking that you send your support financially, in kind donations, and help give advisement and guidance so that we have a more structured organization, that we are intersectional while we are doing this work. I have a shirt that simply says, "Stop killing us." We are fighting to live. We are fighting to survive. And as a Black mama, most of us wanted to be George Floyd's mother. We've wanted to be the parents of all of those slain. And we want to continue to stand in that fight of making sure that the lives of all of the following generations are able to not have to continue to do this work, but they can work for a better collective for all communities of color. Again, I am Reverend Sheri Dickerson with the Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City Organization, ED of Black Lives Matter Oklahoma, And we say that we are ready to do this work with each of you. I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. And I say bless you all.
Thank you, Reverend Dickerson. Your message, not only that Black Lives Matter, but that it's more than a slogan, that we need to move forward, take action, join you in solidarity to support the effort so that everyone supports the movement for Black Lives Matter. Thank you so much. And you may notice that Reverend Dickerson is in her car because she, as soon as this panel is over, she's en route to a protest action where she's likely to be arrested once again. Thank you, Reverend Dickerson. Our next speaker is Shah, Red Hawk Woman. She's here with us from Lawton, Oklahoma. She's lived in Oklahoma for 5 years as the director of the American Indian Movement, Indian Territory, Oklahoma. She is committed to fighting for justice for Native people, as well as standing in solidarity with other people of color. Mary works with many different organizations, as well as the organization in Oklahoma called Murdered, Missing, and Indigenous Women Oklahoma Chapter. Thank you, Shah, for being here. Please go ahead.
Thank you for having me. Like I was saying, I'm the director of the American Indian Movement, Indian Territory here in Oklahoma. And we picked the name Indian Territory because that's what Oklahoma was called before it became Oklahoma. You got 39 federally recognized tribes, which majority of the tribes that are here were forcibly removed from their homelands and made to march here to Oklahoma. Many may know the history of the Trail of Tears that many tribes had faced, and we lost a lot of our people. Our chapter has been going for about 3 years, and we really work on our sovereignty. We push treaty rights, and we bring awareness not only to police brutality, but to our murdered and missing Indigenous women. Our women are 10 times more likely to be murdered or missing among any other race. Our Native people are more likely or are at a higher rate to be killed by police or face police brutality. So especially here in Oklahoma, actually after I'm done with this, we're going to the chapter is going to a memorial visual for a Zachary Bearhill, who was killed up in Omaha, Nebraska, but he's from Oklahoma. And the police were not, they went to court, but was found not guilty, which is like everything, you know, when a police kills somebody, you know, it's justified, you know, they come up with excuses. We're still seeking justice for Mahavis Good Blanket, who was killed by Custer County Police Department, and the officers received medals for killing him. He was an unarmed teenager who was shot and killed by the police in his own home. And we stand with at many events with Sheri Dickerson with the Black Lives Matter. We stand with the Brown Berets, the Black Panthers, just so many different organizations of people of color that we stand with. We stand with Tsuru for Solidarity. That was an amazing thing that when you guys came down last year, and just all the different organizations coming together, seeing the diversity of the people who was there at the march. We were in Ada, Oklahoma yesterday for the Black Lives Matter protest, and there was close to about 1,000 people there. And it was people of all colors, people of all backgrounds. It had a lot of good speakers in there, but I think like Sheri was thinking, with our issues with, you know, we kind of get left out. We're the original landowners of this country. And even though we are at the highest rate of murdered and missing, and police brutality, we don't get news media. We don't get like a platform to tell our stories. So by you inviting us, and giving us room for discussions and a platform, that's a big step for acknowledging us. Sheri, she's always acknowledges, the indigenous people, and I think that's really honorable, and I really appreciate that. We appreciate that, and we understand the hurt and the pain that our Black brothers and Black sisters are feeling, because we feel that same pain and that same hurt. This country was built on the genocide of our people and the backs of the Black people, but yet it's still run by white supremacy. And here we are in 2020, and we're still having to have these discussions of racism and injustice of people of color. And we've been fighting that ever since the first white person stepped foot on this country. And that's over 500 years. And when are we going to say enough is enough? And it's like Sheri was saying, there is a uprising. And I think as long as we keep that momentum going and we continue to come together in solidarity and united, we're going to come out on top. That's what the government and the white supremacy is scared of, is they are scared to see people of color from all backgrounds coming together and standing united and saying, we've had enough, this is enough. And that's what we need to continue doing, is just standing and having our voices heard, and having our voices heard loudly.
Thank you, Shatasha Ria. I'm reminded when we had the Buddhist ministers at Fort Sill that it was Shatasha Ria who used her body to block counter-protesters who were threatening to approach the Buddhist ministers to interrupt the ritual that was being planned. So we want to thank you for that. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Neidi Dominguez. Neidi is a national immigrant workers' rights activist and organizer. She serves as a senior advisor for Mijente, Fuera, Trump Initiative, and United for Respect, working with retail workers. She is National States Deputy Director of the U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders for the 2020 presidential election campaign. She's formerly undocumented herself. Dominguez was a central leader in the campaign to win deferred action for childhood arrivals. Thank you, Neidi, for being here.
Thank you all. It's such an honor to really be in sharing this space with all of you, and to see a lot of familiar faces. So sending a lot of gratitude to my sisters from Fort Sill and the action that, Tsuru for Solidarity connected us with back then. So it's good to see everyone. I really want to say thank you to Tsuru for Solidarity to actually putting together this panel. I think it's such a timely conversation that we need to be having, and it's a very painful one as well as a inspiring one. And I think we need to acknowledge how much pain and rage our communities are experiencing in this moment and have experienced for generations. And I completely agree with everything all of you have already shared about just this is not new for our communities. But I really want to share a little bit, I think, about my own kind of take on this moment. And, I I think for me, it's important to name that even in my own trajectory as a immigrant rights activist, and then organizer, I was brought up watching my mother organize day laborers and domestic workers, and so for me, very early on, my own trajectory as an organizer was very much grounded in working class struggles and working people in our families. And I think in this moment, it's very clear to me that as we continue to process both the pain and the rage, and also the opportunity that we have as a community, that we really are able to identify like who are the real enemies here, and like what are the broken systems that we have to really reckon with and hopefully completely abolish and create completely new ones. I think our people right now are sending, all of our people right now in the streets are sending everyone a very solid message that this is not a moment to reform, but this is a moment to end the oppression, and the police brutality and detention, that this is a moment for our people to be free. And I really also want to name how beautiful also has been and powerful to watch so many young people take the streets, and to acknowledge that I think all of us will play different roles, but that we have a role to play, and just to let the young people lead us in those roles. And so with that, I really want to just make the connection that I have heard many of my own comrades in the movement for Black Lives talk about how the murders of Black people by the police and the state are not new, but that in this moment, I think it's really important to understand that thousands of Black people have been dying in the last 2 months from COVID-19. And to understand that the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor are two of so many murders by the police and the state of Black people in this country. And that in this moment, we have both the moral responsibility, but also our own responsibility to be in solidarity and in struggle with all of our communities, and to be able to say and be able to really own that as long as Black people are not free and safe to live their best lives in this country, then none of us are. And so as Mijente, for us, is very clear as a hub of Latinx people that from our own beginning, we were very clear. We were a Latinx political home for people that are pro-Black, pro-poor, pro-working class, pro-queer. And this is the moment for us to show up, right? And just show up. This is a struggle that affects all of us. And if we are able to ensure that Black people from wherever they may be are safe and can live their lives, then we will all be in a better place. And for Latinos specifically, we have a lot of really, like, we have a lot to owe to the Black and Black American struggle in this country when it comes to racial justice. And I think that could be said for so many of the ways that all of our struggles are intersected and connected. And so I am so clear and grounded in this moment that whatever work all of us are able to do, if it's donate, if it's show up to the protest, if it's making calls, if it's texting people, if it's bringing new people in, if it's having hard conversations with our own families around anti-Blackness, that we do that, and that we do that with a very, very clear understanding that this is our fight too. And so thank you for making this space and so powerful to be together.
Thank you, Neidi, for those very powerful words. We're going to move on to Maru Mora, Villalpando. Maru Mora is here from Tacoma, Washington. She is a community organizer and undocumented immigrant mother. She's co-founder of La Resistencia organizing alongside people detained at the Northwest Detention Center for the past 6 years. The group's main focus is to shut down the immigration detention in Tacoma while gaining better treatment and conditions for all undocumented immigrants held there and following the lead of people detained. Due to the successful work she has been a part of, in December 2011, ICE put Maru Mora in deportation proceedings. Despite these challenges, Maru is undeterred, continues her community organizing work. I give you Maru Mora.
Thank you. Good morning from Tacoma, Washington. Actually, the deportation proceeding started in December 2017. Well, you know, but it feels like forever. I just feel really grateful for the opportunity again to partner with Tsuru for Solidarity. They organized an amazing action in February of this year where we had hundreds of people showing up, and it was a very powerful moment to see so many allies and co-conspirators coming together outside the detention center and continue to do so after that action in February. My community is the undocumented community, mainly the Latinx community, but I work alongside people detained that happen to be from almost everywhere in the world, but vast majority people of color. I think that for us, it's very important to realize how, as it was mentioned by Silky, living in a country where we have the largest imprisoned population, we also have the largest immigrant detention in the world. And it's not coincidence that the vast majority of people detained are people of color, poor people, immigrants. A good example, I think, to realize how racist the immigration system is something that I share every time I have the opportunity. In 2017, when Trump took office and ran like hell with this machine created by both Republicans and Democrats, we saw an uptick in hunger strikes. And here in Tacoma, Washington wasn't obviously the exception. We started the year, I remember very clearly, with about 60 Cubans demanding their freedom, and they went on hunger strike, and they didn't stop until they were getting released. And that took months. And I noticed as the 60 end up being released, because ICE didn't have legal excuses to keep them any longer detained, they actually released the light-skinned Cubans first. And the very last that we saw released were the Black Cubans. And this was not because the legal cases were different. It was clear racism. People in detention tell us again and again, if you don't speak English, if you're darker skin, you get treated the worst here in detention. So for us, it's important to connect both how the criminal and the immigration system work together, how the police and immigration act the same way, they're one and the same. And they're also the treatment of the people in detention, the people that are in cages, to be clearly also racist. And now under COVID-19, we saw this also huge number of hunger strikes that we have never seen before at a national level, calling for the immediate release because people are dying. People were already not safe under ICE custody, but now we're looking at a horrible fear that people are facing. Our undocumented community in the outside is also facing terrible consequences because of COVID-19, but we're talking about, again, Black immigrants. We're talking about Black people that might be forgotten by many. And so for us, it's very important to see the connections, yes, both how these systems operate against us, but also how we replicate those systems, how we protect those systems, and how we police each other. Thinking that we're going to be accepted in the future somehow by the people in power, by the white dominant culture. And so that's part of our work too, both as undocumented communities and both detained communities. I personally have called my own undocumented community to really think about whether we want to ask for citizenship. When we see citizens for so many centuries being treated the way they're treated, when we see Native Americans, when we see Black people that are US citizens being treated as disposable, how can we undocumented call ourselves for citizenship? I think we need to first make sure that those that are US citizens are treated as such, that those communities are treated with respect, that those communities are treated with equity. So then we can come along and ask for that kind of right. And so it is completely bound together, that we need to work together, that we need to fight together, and we need to learn when we get to be the ones at the leadership and when we get to follow. And that is not easy. A lot of people forget that we're not always leaders and we need to follow. And I invite people to follow the leadership of the Black community, the Black immigrant community, the detained community, and staying side by side now, this moment that we can win. This is the moment where we can win, but we have to be really smart, and we have to be really humble to follow those that are in the leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Maru. Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Nana Gyamfi. Nana is Executive Director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration. It is the largest Black-led social organization representing nearly 10 million Black immigrants, refugees, and families living in the US. She is a movement attorney for the past 25 years. Nana is co-founder of Justice Warriors for Black Lives and Human Rights Advocacy. She's also a former professor in the Pan-African Studies Department at California State University, Los Angeles. And she hosts her own weekly radio show, Conversations on the Way, the Asafo edition. Please join us, Nana.
Thank you so very much. Really appreciate you. Thank you, Tsuru, for solidarity. Thank you to all of our panelists and all of you who have joined us to participate in this panel. I bring greetings of solidarity from the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and pleased to speak in this moment. We're challenged right now to address some core questions, especially those questions that have been rightly raised by our sister Satsuki. And it really comes down to, what does it mean for Black people, for Indigenous people, and other people of color to live in the so-called land of the free and home of the brave? And what does it mean for a non-white person to be a citizen of the United States, as our sister Mora raised? The US tells the world that if you live here, citizen or immigrant, that you can achieve the American dream. But how are we, Black immigrants, Japanese Americans, and other people of color, whether US citizens or immigrants, entitled to the promise of America and that American dream when that dream is denied to multi-generational African Americans? This idea that so many in our communities have, that we non-African Americans should have when they do not have, that we should be free when they are not free, is itself a form of anti-Blackness that we must confront and address. As Black immigrants, we have no choice but to confront and address anti-Blackness, because we are subjected to the terrors of white supremacy along with our African American siblings. 3 Black immigrants, Fanan Berhi, Eritrean American, Yassine Mohammed, Sudanese American, and Momodou Lamine Sisse, Gambian American, were murdered by police in the month of May alone. And we are disproportionately targeted for enforcement, whether by the criminal sanctions or the detention deportation systems, caging, whether it's in detention centers, jails, prisons, or juvenile detention, and deportation, because we are Black. It is our Blackness that makes us the target of white terror. Right now, Black people, citizen and immigrant, need for all of us, including you, to support the most daring of our demands that we are making right now, the demands that were raised by our sister Sheri, the demands for abolition. That means not the reform, but the ending of policing, the ending of caging, the defunding of enforcement, the releasing of people from cages, including detention centers and jails, including Black political prisoners for whom Free 'em All was initially designed and turned now into Free Them All. Let's not forget the Black political prisoners that are part of that free. And by investing in Black communities in the ways, again, that our Reverend Sheri and Black Lives Matter and the Movement for Black Lives, which includes Baji, have outlined for the world, as well as supporting Black-led organizations and formations such as Baji. You can reach us at baji.org. You can follow us at Baji Tweet and Insta Baji. And I want to make a special plea for the Black Immigrant Collective in Minneapolis, who did everything that needed to be done to support that work right there at the epicenter. And you can donate to them at paypal.me Black immigrants, paypal.me Black immigrants. Too often, too many of us justify our right to human dignity and freedom in the United States by talking about our economic contributions, how we fought in US wars, our intellectual and cultural contributions, our labor. Yet no one has contributed more to this country than African Americans. And the rights of those of us born in this country to US citizenship, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, was paid through the blood and the triumph of African American ancestors, those enslaved and free Africans who were the first naturalized citizens of the United States. If the American dream for African Americans is actually, as our brother Malcolm said, an American nightmare, then we are required, all of us, obligated, in fact, to fight for the rights of African Americans, for our siblings, and for their real liberation, at least in the United States, because we know this is a global struggle. When African Americans are free, all of us living in the United States will be free. Let's get free.
Thank you so much, Nana. You know, I'm just struck. We have to wrap up now because we have used up our time. But I just want to say that most of us are getting our news information about what's happening in the world by real news and fake news. But there's nothing more compelling than hearing from people who are on the front line and hearing the facts and the experience and the truths from all of you 6 women who have taken time away from your communities to be with us. I want to say thank you. And to the audience, I want to urge you to take some of the light from each of these women and bring it into your own heart and your own energy and work together so we can make a change. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Dr. Ina, and the distinguished panelists for